you, and welcome to my talk. I'm so happy to see each one of you here, and I'm thrilled to be back here in Denver because I think Explore DDD is such a wonderful conference. My name is Anita Kvamme, as you heard from the introduction. I have been working with software design for more than 20 years. I work in a company called Equinor. It's a energy solution company, a multinational company with its headquarters in Norway. The title of my talk today is Modeling the Domain Model with a User's Mental Model in Mind. And there is a story behind the talk. You see, when I was on the age of my oldest daughter and I needed to decide what I wanted to study, I was thinking, maybe I want to be a psychologist or a coder. And I don't know why, that was my two options, but that was how it was. So I started out with 1 year of studying psychology at the university. And back there in Norway, it was about 3 years waiting time to get into the professional study to become a psychologist. So my next step was to start in the Norwegian Technical University to become a coder. And that was the first time I heard about usability. And I was like, yes, this is perfect. It's like made for me. I can code, but still have a human dimension. That is so great. However, I didn't feel we learned enough about how to make good user interfaces. So I remember approaching one of my professors, asking him kindly to tell us more about how to make usable solution. And I said to him, there's theories from psychology that can be useful for us. And he looked at me and he didn't smile and he said, psychologists? They are studying insane people. We cannot learn from them. Anyway, I graduated with a master in software engineering and a high passion for usability. And with my focus on usability, I learned years ago about a model which stated that if you're able to communicate the functionality in a user interface through a designer model that is close to the user mental model, you are more likely to get a usable solution. This model is most known from the book Psychology of Everyday Things. A newer version of the book is called The Design of Everyday Thing, and the author is Dan Norman. Well, so the user's mental model is what he or she thinks she knows about the system at hand. And the user's mental model for a business solution will be influenced by the mental model of the business and by the mental model of how this type of solution typically works. And then he or she uses this to unconsciously predict the behavior of the solution. So I figured out fast that I need to have this great designer model to make these great user interfaces, but I can't do this alone. I was coming directly from the university, and I didn't know the domain I was working in. So I started to make explicit models instead of just having the designer model in my head. And I discussed it with the user. I made drawings and I said, is this how you look upon your business? And sometimes they say, no, it's not completely like that, it's more like this. And I discussed it with the rest of my team. And I asked questions like, this concept here that we have in our technical design, how should I communicate that to the user? How should it fit in the way of the user are thinking? And sometimes we ended up with, we remove it from the user, they should not see it. And if we are going to hide it from the user, what is it doing in our solution? So sometimes we remove it from the backend too. So back then, long time before the wonderful blue book was written, I was modeling the domain model to make great software design. And I find great similarities between doing this UX part and DDD, even though the end goal is a bit different. When we're doing DDD, we want the model that we should exploit in code, while for the user interface part, we want a designer model that should be close to the user's mental model. Oh no. Just to have the designer model, user mental model gap as small as possible. And changing the ultimate designer model was my door into the world of modeling. And today, I will share with you my experience from a 3 years long project where we took our giant of a legacy application and we made part of it a more modular solution. And this application is called Energy Bus. It has one part that is invoicing, and one part that is financial services. And it was the financial service part we should make a new server-side to remove a technical risk, and at the same time, make a more modular solution in C#. So, this journey here, I will not talk so much about the journey we did. I will just say that our giant, it was really huge. The first line of server-side code was written back in 1993, and it has been enhanced for more than 20 years when we started with our project. Luckily, we had a team that has been working in this area for years and years, so we knew the solution in detail, and we also knew the business domain very well. And that comes also handy when you are going to do a DDD part. So what I will do today, not talk so much about the journey, I've done this before with Ellen Lippe, which is my friend and my wonderful DDD mentor. Today I will talk about the modeling we did inside some of our bonded context. And a lot of this is based on my reflection after the project was finished. Because you see, I don't think an opportunity like this, working in such a huge DDD project, in an area where I know the business domain so well, we come too often. And therefore, I use quite a lot of time just to take with me all the learnings possible. And I will try to share some of my reflection together with how we work with you. The first bonded context I will talk about today is called production split. And I picked this one because it's a fairly easy one and therefore a good starting point for telling you how we approach our modeling. And since how we did this was important for the result we got, I want to share this with you. But the first thing first, I need to tell you some about the business. You see, in Norway, the government actually owns part of the oil and gas fields. This is called the State Direct Financial Interest, or SDFI, but I will just refer to state here today to make it simpler for myself. However, our government has clearly other tasks to do than chasing gas customers, making invoices, sending them out, making people pay. So Equinor has this special responsibility of handling this government's gas market shares, meaning that when we send an invoice, the customer can pay that invoice as any other invoice, for instance, a gas sales invoice. However, some of the money we get in belongs to the government. So we need to figure out a way to split it between the state and Equinor. And the government has written a long instruction for how to do this because it's different rules for different types of invoices. But the beauty of TDD is that we do not need to think about it all at once. So the production split bonded context main purpose is just to calculate this split. And you can look upon the split as a pie chart with a state percentage and Equinor percentage and some other information. And there is more than 20 of these in our solution. And they have a configuration with a set of fields that is relevant for how they are calculated. So, when we had this basis understanding of what we should build, we started out with gathering the whole team in one room and we discussed it. What bonded context should this be solved in? Do we need a new one? Do we have an existing one it should be part of? Or do we need multiple bonded context? We didn't know all the wording that Erik Evans learned us yesterday. I like that, the different words. So if I should have done this today, I would have taken that into account too. What is this new bonded context called? Anyway, when we've done this, we asked, how do we trigger this service? And what information do we need? And what part of that information is owned by this bonded context and what part is owned by other? The ones that is owned by this is marked with a database symbol. And then finally, what is the outcome of this service? And we also, for this, that was fairly simple, we added the calculations rules. And I haven't added them here because I can't share all my company secrets with you, but you probably see the picture. And you might think that this was a very data-focused approach, but believe me, it didn't feel that way. And I know what a data-focused approach is, because in our old solution, the backend was tightly covered to the database, and we couldn't write a single line of code before the database definition was in place. Here, on the other hand, we just saw the domain objects on the boundaries, and that was a good starting point for knowing what aggregate to pay attention to. So when we had done this, we was ready to do the fun stuff. And what is the fun stuff? Anyone? It's modeling the domain, of course. And we used BDD, or behavior-driven development, for doing this. And there you write a set of scenarios on the form given, which gradually gives the structure of the input aggregates. When, just identify the service as hand, and then identify the result of the calculation. And by adding new and new feature tests, we pick up one-on-one requirement and use this to forming the aggregates. And I heard one of the talk for the foundation of Cucumber, a well-known BDD tool at Exchange DDD, I think it was, and he used the term discovering the domain when doing BDD. And I think that was what it felt for us. And we had done specification by examples before, but then we made this huge example with all the details, and it wasn't so easy to handle for making the domain modeling. Here, on the other hand, we started with really small feature tests. We call them feature tests. So for instance, given ordinary split type configuration, and the word ordinary, that's the name that the users call just this type of split. An ordinary split type is configured with the fields Brage and Troll, and Brage and Troll is two different fields in the ocean. So we try to use the language that the business use here, and be as concrete as possible. When calculating the production split, well, then an ordinary production split has been calculated. It isn't much information in this test, but still it's enough to start shaping our domain model. And then we added a new one. And I will not read that one out loud here, but you see we added more details, meaning that we could shape our domain model even more. And of course, when starting out really small and adding new and new feature tests for shaping your domain model, you need to refactor all the time. And we actually skipped the unit test just to avoid them being in our way, so we can refactor as crazy, as Ellen Lippe used to say. So we refactored all the time, adding new and new feature tests until we had covered all the requirements, and then those had shaped the domain model. And doing this was a good opportunity to get a more behavioral look of things. It's like looking on the domain from outside and in, and you get a more behavior-driven way. You understand some connections. And this worked really well for us. And for this one, it was really a simple bonnet context to do. And I think that was because the user's mental model was easy to spot. The production fields, and the production is physical. The production split is easy to discuss or reason about, so it was easy for us to understand the mental model. However, I need to make one thing clear. I do not suggest we are going to copy the user mental model. For the first, there's nothing like the user mental model. Each user has its own, even there are similarities. Secondly, when I think about all the strange things I have in my head, copying part of it into a domain model would probably not work. It will be far too much details. It's like when we make this map. We do not try to put all the details there, just make sure that the details we actually place there is correct and makes sense and is useful for the problem to solve. So this was an easy bonnet context for us, but do you see one thing that doesn't make sense here? I made it rather easy though, making it in yellow. Simple rules. Do we do DDD for simple stuff? Do we? Well, Steve Allow said at Explore DDD last year that he didn't buy that DDD was only for the hard stuff. It was just that the hard stuff needed DDD even more. And he also said he didn't buy that doing DDD was a lot of overhead if you don't look upon knowing the business as an overhead. And our team, we had a lot of business competence. I tried to accumulate number of years the people in the team when the project started had working with the solution and with our users, and I stopped that accumulation when I came to 80 years. So we had a lot of business competence. And Eric said last year that we should practice DDD more. And for us, doing DDD in such a simple bonnet context was a perfect place to practice how to use our feature test to shape our domain models, because we got bonnet contexts that was much more complicated too. So, as I said, I do not believe in copying the user mentor model. Just make sure that the user mentor model makes sense given the business. And of course, first of all, you need to understand what problem you are solving, because it could be times when the user way of doing stuff is not the best way of solving the problems. And especially when working with legacy solution, the user's way of doing things can be influenced by, or should we just say dictated by, the old solution. And this was something we experienced in our next bonnet context. In this bonnet context, when you have this invoice and you had the production split, the user need to know that things are ready and push a button to make what the solution called an SDFI invoice. And then they can credit that invoice, adjust it, delete it, and do all strange things that led to situation that was hard to handle. In addition, it was hard for them to know every time they needed to do this operation. And it was clear for us that their way of doing stuff was heavily influenced by the legacy solution. So we had to take a step back and say, what are we actually trying to solve here? And that was to make this split, so you have the information, the Statoil and estate amount, the Equinor amount, and other important information for accounting. That was the purpose of this bonnet context. So we looked for simplification, and we decided we need to do some changes. So we had discussion with our users, and we decided to remove this SDFI invoice concept, and that we should automatically trigger the calculation, and we introduced a new concept, Equinor state split. And this discussion was really important information into our feature test, also our domain modeling. When it comes to when this should be triggered, well, here was our user way of thinking about their business, our best source of interest, or our best source of information, sorry. So we ended up with an aggregate here, the output of the calculation with a set of split lines. And in retrospect, I see that the grouping of this split line was not so visible in our domain model, even though we have technical ways to group them correctly. And I also see that our user, for them, the grouping is really important. So one learning for me here is that when we do domain modeling and we need to model something different for how the users are doing things today, it's so easy to end up with a domain model with a touch of a technical way to look upon things. And in addition, we got a bit of language confusion. Was it Equinor state split, or was it state invoice split? What was it actually we ended up with? So if I should have done this again, I would actually made sure I had some time after the user has used the solution for a while, and I would have inspected how have they adopted the new concept in their mentor model, and look upon, is there something learnings here that could make our domain model even stronger? For us, making the grouping concept would have done that. And in addition, if you update it then, you can make the goal of having this one common language in IT, in the business, and in our code. For now, we live with a touch of language confusion. Luckily, the users are happy with the solution, but I have one more thing on my list for what I want to do better next time. And the last learning was that it made me realize how lucky we were in our project, because most of the bonnet context we work with, we spoke their business language kind of fluently, and that made the modeling so much easier to do. Well, going to the next bonnet context, and this accounting is the bonnet context that's the closest to my heart. And I know you are not supposed to have feelings for your bonnet context, but to be a bit more attached to one of them, I think that should be kind of followed. And you see, the reason for this is that the accounting bonnet context has shown me the power of true DDD, at least I believe that. in a way that none of our other boundary contexts had done. And in addition, it has given me resistance that has given me valuable learning. And there is a fun fact that talking about accounting in a TDD conference is kind of strange, because this is the typical domain where you heard that there's only standard processes and you should buy a solution. But Equinor has SAP to take care of their standard processes related to accounting. And in Energy Boss, the main purpose of the functionality is that the user can set up what we call an accounting template. And that's a configuration that can be used so they are sure that the detailed transactions that are sent to SAP are correct. And if you know something about these big, huge companies, if they don't have their accounting numbers correct, that is really important to do. So all these details has been part of our old Giant for years, and it was really valuable functionality for our users because it made it easy for them to set up and generate correct accounting for new types of invoices. That was important when new business opportunities come along and they wouldn't like to wait for us in IT. So you have this invoice and you have an accounting template, you have a decent set of hard-coded rules, and you generate a set of vouchers. And before I go on, I need to make sure that you all understand the term voucher inside this boundary context. It has nothing to do with discount, rebate, or a free lunch voucher. It is simply one voucher has voucher line, and each voucher line represents one of the transactions that are sent to SAP. So we started out with this voucher calculation for an invoice, and we started out as always on the boundaries, and here it was a lot of information needed. We needed contract configuration, invoice, accounting template, currency rates, unit conversion, and a lot of other stuff. But defining the boundaries was just a small part of it all, because the really huge work was to define all the detailed feature tests, because this calculation is probably much more complicated than it sounds like, because we're talking hundreds and hundreds of the feature tests here. So in this boundary context, it was clear that we couldn't manage to do the voucher calculation with just using the domain objects we have identified on the boundaries and using the feature test and let that one guide us. We needed more power in our domain model, so we had more sessions on the whiteboard discussing alternatives and look upon how you should do your modeling. And we ended up to adding some concept like accounting input, voucher calculation basis, and voucher calculation basis line. And I heard the user talk about invoice, template, and voucher all the time, and I didn't hear them walking in the hallways talking about accounting input, for instance. However, they told us that in this and this and this scenario, you should take the quantity from the invoice and put it into the accounting. And some other scenarios, you should not do that. So they had the concept there. It was just not so visible, so we had to extract it a bit differently. So actually, spotting the more invisible boundary context was one of the challenges that this accounting boundary context made us to do. Did I say invisible boundary context? I mean invisible concepts. So that was one of the challenges it gave us. But we ended up with a model that was really useful, and that felt even better when it was harder to do the modeling. And the second kind of challenge we got was related to the design of one of our aggregates. When we started with the voucher calculation, and we had done that, we ended up with an aggregate of the accounting template, something like this. You have a template ID and some header information, and you have a set of lines, and inside each line you have a set of domain objects. For instance, the SAP company with information like currency and unit. And we did not end up with this template aggregate at the start. At first, we just had the SAP company ID pointing to the rest of the information. But when we included them in our aggregate, we got a domain model that was much more easy to work with and was much more suitable for solving the voucher calculation problem. And we were happy. But guess what happened? Our next move was to make the screen where the user should set up those templates. And then they told us that when we update, for instance, the currency of a SAP company in the master data, we expect this to take effect in all the existing accounting template. And what does this tell us then? Well, if we let's think about the aggregate, for me, an aggregate is something that is a concept that is typically important for our users. And that's so far so good. That was our case in our situation. It should also be visible and important in our domain model, and it is. But it has a third purpose. It is the transaction boundaries. It should define a unit of whole that you create together, you delete it together, you read it together, and you update it together. So, what should we do? They're asking for something else now. And we knew that this way of looking at the accounting template wasn't so useful for our voucher calculation. And the voucher calculation was the real goal in this bonded context. So we ended up, do I dare to tell it in a situation like this? Well, we ended up cheating our ways to the database, actually keeping our domain model that was so important for us, and then we didn't save it completely as the aggregate should have been saved. And this bothered me big time, really big time, because I felt we didn't do DDD correct. And I was thinking, what can we do? Is the only option to go to the template maintenance part? So should we actually make a domain model that is not so useful for the problem, the main problem to solve the voucher calculation, just to say that we do DDD correct, when one of the other purposes of DDD is to make this useful domain models. So I ended up keeping the cheating part. And then I heard a lot of talks. So I heard even one more talk from Eric, where he said that context is something that users are so very good at, but the computers are not. And that was a long time after the project was finished. And I was thinking, why didn't I see that? It is two situations here. And the user, they look upon it as two different contexts, but we have put it into one bonded context, and of course that makes it hard for us. But I think, I've been reasoning, why didn't I see that? But I think we had just one type of users here. It was one concept, accounting template, and the only purpose for having that concept was actually to put it to do the voucher calculation. So I don't think we even thought about this is the typical bonded context issue that you heard about in a more e-commerce order scenario. At least now I see that the user semantic model could have guided us, but we didn't pay attention. And I have learned, and I know what to look for next time. Because should I have done this again, and if I get the possibility to redo this, I will split it into two bonded contexts where the accounting template maintenance is in one, and the voucher calculation that is really important is in one and can keep its really powerful domain model. So, I want to tell you one experience I had, and this is the experience where I think that I saw the true power of DDD. And that was related to the accounting and the voucher calculation. As I told you, we did do this calculation of voucher for an invoice, but it happened to be that we had 3 different scenarios that is related to these calculations. After we had done this voucher calculation, and we did that, and we put it into production, and we knew our domain, so we knew there was 2 other scenarios coming around the corner, but we still had shaped the domain based on our feature test and didn't think so much about what to come. We dared to think that, okay, we're doing it the DDD way, so new business requirements in the same part should kind of fit in, but we didn't dare to know if it will work. So our next scenario is calculate voucher for financial basis. And a financial basis in our solution, that is an aggregation of a lot of invoices, for instance, a set of forecast invoices, and you could have 1 or more accounting template, and you have a whole set of new rules that you need to put into the calculation, and then you generate a lot of water. And as we agree on, this is not free lunches. It's all those detailed transactions that must be correct and will go to SAP. And an important point here that even though at the time of implementation, the voucher calculation needed only a subset of all the rules, well, the goal for the project was that all the power in the accounting template should be relevant for all the 3 scenarios. So this needed to be part of the same core modeling. So that was the second scenario. And then we added the calculate voucher for the split lines that I talked about earlier. And all in all, we had 3 different scenarios. We need to put it in the same core of the domain. And it was a really good test on how to evolve a domain model. And what happened was that one scenario after the other, it just fit into that domain model. It was like there was no resistance at all. It was such a great experience, and it felt so great. And especially since this is our most complicated bonded context. And I, that have worked in this area for years and years, I'm so convinced that if we had done a more technical approach to this and modeling it based on a technical view, we would not be likely to, I am so sure we would not be likely to experience anything close to this. For me, it was the true power of TDD. And if you think about it, even though it made such an impression on me, it shouldn't have done that, because it makes sense that new requirements from a business are easier to fit into a domain model if that is reflecting the business than if it's just reflecting just a technical way to look upon things. But at least it felt so good. Because you see, I don't think that what we experienced was based on luck. Because the truth is that during this project, in almost 3 years, ASOS managed to solve our problem in bonded context after bonded context just by working the way that I have told you here today. I forget to take my slides. They're working this way that I've told you here today, starting with a small domain model and giving it resistant with adding more and more feature tests. And then we refactor and our domain model grows. That was how we worked in all the bonded context, and it worked really well for us. And if I should take this back to where I started with this designer model, this is really similar to what we were thinking in the area of usability. There we used to say that the designer model, or more concrete, the user interface we have at a given time is the one that have handled resistance in the best way. And we seek this. We try to find resistance by doing usability testing and other type of testing of the user interface. And I think that also having this view on adding more and more resistance to our domain model for us with those feature tests is a good thing to do. And in the future, I will focus more on the user's mental model, not instead of anything I've done up till now, but just as an additional approach for actually giving my domain models resistant and making them even stronger. And I'm so very happy because I was able to be part of this project of breaking up our giant monolithic solution. It was a long journey with easy parts and hard parts. And as I have shared with you here today, not everything was perfect. We have bonded context we would like to do better, but we had to deliver too. But it is in a way even better that when you do things and they are not perfect, that they still feels to be really good and really useful. I'm part of the DevOps team for this solution now, and I really think that the promised land of TDD is a very good place to be, even though everything isn't perfect, and especially the cheating on the way to the database keep me almost awake at night. So, as I said, really happy to be part of this journey, also because I'm really proud of what we managed to do. We had this giant, And it was code there for more than 20 years. And we managed to take part of this and throw it out and make bounded context. And all the time the solution was up and running. We couldn't kind of stop it and do a rewrite. We had to do it stepwise and to close together with the users. And I think there is 3 things that is really special, important for what we achieved. And the one thing is that we have the bounded context. So thank you to Eric for that one. We couldn't have done it without it. And secondly, it was this combination of behavior-driven design and our feature test and DDD. Using the test to gradually shape the domain model worked really well. But of course, it only worked really well because we enhanced and refactored all the time. So using C# was a good thing here because it has strong support for renaming stuff, inlining a code and extracting a code. I know that not all the language you are programming in have the same level of support, but for us, that was really good. So I want to send a big thanks to Ellen Lippe, which was our lead architect for most of the time during the project, and which showed us the powerful combination of DDD and BDD. And if you haven't tried that before, I highly recommend it. And finally, the joy of modeling the domain model with a team that had all this incredible business competence, and at the same time, being able to work together with the real users. And the truth is that during these 3 years, we didn't talk about this mental model of the users, because this is something I've been thinking about after the project has ended. But I really think that based on this 80+ years of experience all together in our team, working in this domain with these users, I think we knew their way of thinking so much that the gap between the domain model and the user's mental model naturally became not too big. And maybe one day I will introduce my own model with minimizing the domain model, the user mental model gap, greatly inspired by Dane Norman. And by that, I really hope that you all find the joy of modeling the domain model in your own project, with or without the user's mental model in mind. Thank you for listening.
We have a few minutes left. If there are any questions, I have the microphone. Please raise your hand and we can take some questions.
I was curious about the amount of time that the project took. Like, what was the sort of scale of time of these things that you did in the different stages?
Not sure if the project all the time took about 3 years, but that's not what you are asking. But the time, yeah, so the project was running for almost 3 years. And when it comes to actually doing DDD, I can honestly say that I don't think we used a lot of extra time for doing it this way, but I think it was our focus on having the feature test, and those was implemented. I forgot to mention that we implemented our feature tests, so they also become our highly appreciated safety net. So that is our automatically testing. So that was certainly not waste of time. So since we knew our business so well, we didn't use a lot of extra time either. But we used around 3 years for doing the project. But it was like we started, and then it was some government requirements coming along, and then we needed to do things outside the project for a while, but it was still part of the same solution, so we still did the same DDD approach to it. But all in all, we couldn't plan for a time frame before we started due to this requirement coming on the side. But when it comes to cost, that says something about how long time you had planned to do. We reached our budget on the project, and that's, I think, honestly, that's amazing since it's breaking up a monolith. But almost 3 years the project was running for.
Thank you for the talk. I have a question about tests. You mentioned you used BDD. How many tests approximately you had to write to shape your model?
Oh, that was really different from model to model. As I said, in the accounting context, I think with all the functionality, not just for the calculation, but also for the maintenance, we was around 700 tests. But in other bonnet contexts, I haven't counted there, but it's less than 100 at least. But we wanted to have many tests and even smaller ones, so we could write kind of a scenario description saying that this test actually take care of that requirements. And that is something we use now as a DevOps team to see, did we think to make this rule, or was it by accident if we get a question around it? So, yeah, was it answering?
Hi, thanks for the talk.
Thank
Really
you.
interesting. So I was wondering how you managed to switch over between the monolith to the individual services. Sort of sounds to me like there were probably quite a bit of dependencies in the monolith that you had to worry about.
Yeah, it was. And we put what I used to call the rainy part in the database. So even though we did our bonded context and we knew that this bonded context owned this part of the information, we could not split it out into a separate database because it was other part of this giant that needed that part of information. So that was one of the strategies, and the other one was to use feature toggles. So we added new functionality, and we had a feature toggle so we could switch it on a point in a time when that feature was ready. So we used the database. For some of our body contexts, we were able to split it out, but we couldn't do that for all of them. In some part, actually, the invoicing part was also looking for some information that belongs to financial services. And we didn't change the invoicing part as the part of the project. So that was the main strategy for handling that part. But I think that is a really hard one, and it was good to know the solution really detailed because we didn't get so many surprises, but yeah. Any more questions?
I'm curious about the role of technology in a big endeavor like this to break up a monolith. Would you view it as an opportunity to introduce new technologies that might enable this work? Or would you see it more as a risk that would get in the way of, doing the domain modeling the right way?
Oh, for us, it was clear an opportunity to use new technology. For first, it was a technical risk assessment that kicked off the whole project. But also this old tool that we use, it's called GEN. I wouldn't expect anyone to know about it. That is a tool that is so linked to the database that you are not allowed to write code, actually. You need to select it from menus, and it must be consistent with the database division at any time. So for us, it was a great opportunity to remove the old technology. And I think our team, we used to say that we haven't got a big wall of mud, we have a big wall of value. So we wanted to make our solution more future-proof too. So it was no resistance for using new technology here. It was really cheering.
Anita, thank you for your time. Another round of applause.
Thank you for your questions.